Hey everyone, it's your guy coming at you straight from the chair with another no-filter breakdown of what's really happening in China and the world. Today we're diving deep into something that's been boiling for years. Why do so many of our Indian friends have this weird tangled chip on their shoulder when it comes to China? And I mean, we're not just talking about border skirmishes where they've never come out on top. We're talking about the war of words, the propaganda battles, the whole circus. Every single time they try to flex on China, they end up eating a mouthful of dirt. And the funniest part, the Indians have built this whole self-help fantasy called Victoryology. They actually believe they're winning at everything, but then they run into this Chinese diplomatic bulldozer named Gao Zhikai. And let me tell you, it's like watching a fly smash into a windshield. They not only get zero respect, they usually walk away with their egos in tatters and their talking points shredded. Let's start with a conference that went down in the UAE back in 2025. Picture this, a room full of international big shots, diplomats, scholars, journalists from all over the world, the whole global elite crowd. And up steps this Indian scholar named Naranda. With full theatrical drama, he looks straight at Gao and drops this nasty loaded line. He says, and I quote, "China doesn't have a single friend on this entire planet." And just to make sure it sinks in, he repeats it slowly in that heavy, thick, curry-inflected English of his, like he's reciting some holy mantra. You could hear a pin drop. The whole room is waiting for Gao to lose his cool, to get defensive, to stumble. But Gao, he doesn't even flinch. He leans into the mic with this calm, almost bored expression and fires back with surgical precision. "Mr. Naranda, I know India's biggest, most desperate political dream is to get a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. But if India can't even treat China as a friend, then that goal, my friend, is never ever going to happen." The room goes dead silent for about 2 seconds. And then, bam, the place erupts in applause so loud you'd think a rock concert just kicked off. People are clapping, some are even standing. His finger starts twitching and shaking for a solid minute. And the guy literally cannot string together a single coherent word. His brain just flatlined on live television. That right there is what we call a nuclear takedown. And you know what? That moment perfectly captures the entire India-China dynamic in a nutshell. India swings big, China counters with a scalpel, and India walks away bleeding. Now let's talk about India's UN Security Council obsession, because honestly, it's pathological at this point. It's not just a policy goal, it's a national neurosis. They've been begging for a permanent seat since 1994. That's over 30 years of nonstop application. Rejection, repeat. 30 years of sending diplomats to New York. 30 years of lobbying, 30 years of getting slapped down. By 2025, they pulled together this so-called Gang of Four with Japan, Germany, and Brazil trying to blow up the permanent 5 to 11 seats. They thought if they just packed the room with enough allies, they could force their way in. And what happened? They got crushed by a coalition of over a dozen countries, calling themselves the Coffee Club. These guys literally formed a counterblock just to make sure India's dream stays dead. Now, you see all those memes online about the P5 taking turns vetoing India? Here's the reality check. India never even made it to the voting stage. Not once, not even close. The procedural hurdles are brutal. First, you need 2/3 of the entire UN General Assembly to say yes. That's 193 countries. And you need 129 of them to back you. Then you need at least 9 out of 15 Security Council members to agree. And only after that do you even get to the P5S veto table. India hasn't cleared step 1 in over 3 decades. And here's the hard truth that Indians refuse to swallow. It's not that the Security Council created the P5. It's that the P5 created the Security Council. This is the Yalta system from World War II, pure and simple. The P5 are the victors' club, period. They won the war, they wrote the rules, and on top of that, these 5 nations still hold the most lethal military firepower on the planet. The United States, Russia, China, Britain, France. These countries have nuclear submarines, aircraft carrier battle groups, hypersonic missiles, global surveillance networks. So when India drags Japan and Germany, 2 defeated Axis powers from World War II, into their little campaign, it's beyond delusional. It's actually kind of embarrassing. If losers get permanent seats, what was the point of all that sacrifice? What about the millions who died defeating fascism? What about the D-Day landings, the Battle of Midway, the Eastern Front? India's logic is so twisted it's almost impressive. They want the rewards without paying the price. They want the seat without the history. And that my friends, is the definition of entitlement, and that brings us straight to the heart of the disease, India's so-called Victoryology. This isn't just a mindset, it's a full-blown alternate reality. Under Modi's government, they're running this double game. At home, they pump out nonstop propaganda about India becoming a global superpower, while the rest of the international community is quietly laughing behind their backs. Their economic reforms are a train wreck. Unemployment is sky high, farmer protests are everywhere. Inflation is eating people alive, yet modest approval ratings stay high. How? Because Victoryology is a drug, and they're all hooked. They get absolutely dominated by Pakistan in an air skirmish. Pakistan literally shows wreckage and satellite proof. They parade the captured pilot on television, and India still throws victory parades and sends out 7 international propaganda teams to sell the lie. I mean, come on, that's not spin. That psychosis Victoryology isn't about convincing the world. It's about hypnotizing themselves, and it's got deep roots in Hindu karma and reincarnation. Lose this life, no worries. Well, win the next one. It's a coping mechanism for a country that can't face reality, a psychological crutch for a civilization that was colonized, humiliated, and now desperately wants to prove something to the world. But here's the kicker: Gao Zhikai is the ultimate antidote to this whole fantasy factory. He's built a legendary track record of dismantling Indian Victoryology piece by piece, and he's got the clips to prove it. This guy doesn't just beat them in debates. He embarrasses them so thoroughly that they can't even look at themselves in the mirror afterward. Take the India-Pakistan air clash in February 2025. Pakistan shot down an Indian jet, captured the pilot, showed the wreckage clear as day, no room for interpretation. But Modi's government went full Orwellian. They flipped the narrative, declared a great victory, and even dispatched 7 dedicated teams to tour the world selling that fairy tale. Meanwhile, Indian domestic media went into full self-hypnosis mode. Every news channel, every newspaper, every social media influencer singing the same tune. So Gao gets invited onto an Indian television show hosted by Arnab Goswami. This guy is a Victoryology high priest. His show dominates English news ratings in India, and he's known for screaming down anyone who disagrees. Think of him as the Indian version of a cable news firebrand, but with more volume and less substance. Arnab spends the whole segment bragging about how India supposedly crushed Pakistan, then deliberately tries to bait Gao by claiming Chinese-made air defense systems failed in the battle. He even gets arrogant enough to tell Gao right on air to go back to school and write a PhD thesis on it. Can you imagine the audacity? Telling a senior Chinese diplomat to go write a dissertation? But Gao stays cool as ice. He just lays out the facts. Pakistan released full satellite images of the destroyed jet and the obliterated air defense systems. Hard evidence that's publicly available for anyone with an internet connection to verify. Meanwhile, India's own so-called evidence actually proved that Chinese missiles hit their targets with pinpoint accuracy. The Indian military accidentally released photos that showed the impact craters exactly where the Chinese systems were aimed. Arnab instantly loses it, screams that they didn't invite Gao to whitewash anything, and goes into full rant mode, talking faster, louder, cutting Gao off mid-sentence. The whole unhinged performance. His face is red, his veins are popping, he's waving his arms like a windmill. So Gao does something brilliant. He switches to flawless, aristocratic British English, the Queen's English. The kind that still echoes colonial authority. And you know what happens? Arnab shuts up immediately, like dead quiet. His whole demeanor changes. His shoulders drop. His voice goes soft. He starts stammering. Think about it. The British ruled India for over 200 years, and that accent still carries weight, status, and power in Indian elite circles. Most Indians still speak that heavy, sing-song curry English, and that colonial inferiority complex is baked right into their upper class. It's not just a language thing, it's a class thing, a power thing, a psychological thing. Gao knew exactly which button to push, and he pushed it hard. He didn't even need to argue, he just switched accents and won. Now fast forward to August 2025, Arnab invites Gao back on the show, but this time he brings in a Russian expert and 2 American think tank types to discuss US tariffs on India. The Trump administration had just slapped a 45% penalty on Indian steel and aluminum, citing India's ongoing support for Russia's war machine. This was a serious blow to India's economy. Steel and aluminum are huge exports for them, and the Indian government was scrambling to respond. The show's producers clearly set it up to make Gao and the Russian guy look like the anti-American tag team, hoping to stir up a shouting match and get some juicy ratings. They wanted a brawl, a three-ring circus of accusations and counter-accusations. But Gao reads the room in 2 seconds flat and refuses to play their game. Instead, he opens with a genius-level flattery bomb. Here's the trick. He knows the Indian psyche cold. If you criticize them, they'll argue with you for 3 days straight. But if you praise them, legitimately praise them, they go quiet and listen. That's the fatal flaw of Victoryology when they think they've already won. You just say, no, you're not just winning. You're winning so hard that you're in a league of your own. And they'll eat up every word you say after that. So Gao goes, right now, America is holding a gun to India's head on trade. They're using tariffs as a weapon, as a chokehold. But India is strong, stronger than they think. The Indian government and its people have every right to buy oil from whoever they want. Nobody, not America, not anyone, has the right to stop India from buying Russian oil. Then he pivots. When America bullied China, we never backed down. We stood our ground, we took the hits, and we're ready to take trade to zero if they keep pushing. And I believe India can do the same. I believe India has that same resolve, that same courage. The American experts immediately sense danger and clam up, because at that exact moment, the US was getting strangled by China's rare earth chokehold, and they knew better than to open that can of worms. China controls the vast majority of global rare earth production. These are critical minerals for everything from smartphones to fighter jets, and the Pentagon was quietly panicking about supply chains. Then Gao drops the hammer. I believe China can defend trade freedom, and India can too. For an Indian audience that's been starving for global respect, that one line sent them into orbit. It hit them right in the pride, right in the ego, right in that desperate need to be treated as an equal. Even Arnab, the Victoryology king, completely lost his composure, turned to the American experts, and started screaming. Professor Gao is right. We don't need to trade with America. America can't push Russia around, can't push China around, and sure as hell can't push India around. If us three superpowers join forces, what is America going to do? The clip exploded across Indian internet. The hashtag India Rising trended with over 100,000 posts. And Indian netizens went crazy saying, finally someone on the world stage sees us as stronger than America. The show's producers were absolutely floored. They never expected their own setup to backfire that spectacularly. They thought they were getting an anti-American brawl. And instead they got a Chinese diplomat hijacking their own narrative and turning India's ego against itself. But the absolute crown jewel, the one that really cemented Gao's legend, the one that still gets played on loop in Chinese social media, has to be the famous Gao Zhikai line. In June 2025, during an international panel, an Indian expert started pushing the McMahon Line as the so-called legal border between India and China. He was going on and on about treaties and British-era documents, trying to sound all authoritative and scholarly. Most people would get dragged into a boring legal debate about whether that line is valid under international law. They'd bring up maps, cite precedents, argue about colonial era agreements, the whole tedious diplomatic dance. But Gao, he takes a sledgehammer to the whole table and says, the British drew that line with a pen and paper over 100 years ago without ever consulting a single Chinese official. They didn't ask us. They didn't negotiate with us. They didn't even tell us if that counts as a legal border. Then let me draw a new line right now. I say let's make the Ganges River the border. How about that? The entire Indian establishment, from government ministers to ordinary social media users, went into complete meltdown. News channels covered it for days. Parliament debated it. Twitter exploded with outrage. The Ganges' border Gao line became an instant legendary meme across both countries. Now, here's the real history that Indians don't want to talk about, and I'm going to lay it out for you, because this is the kind of historical context that American audiences need to understand the full picture. The McMahon Line is pure colonial fiction. Back in 1914, a British official named McMahon cooked up that line with some Tibetan aristocrats, not with the Chinese government, not with any legitimate Chinese authority, carving out about 90,000 square kilometers of Chinese territory into British India's maps. That's an area bigger than Portugal, bigger than Hungary, bigger than South Korea, all to support Tibetan independence and split China apart. The Beiyang government in Beijing never recognized it. Not for a second, they rejected it immediately and categorically. It wasn't even printed on official British maps until 1936, and even then, They marked it as undemarcated, meaning even the British weren't sure about it. When India got independence in 1947, they just unilaterally declared it valid, as if history started the day they showed up, as if centuries of Chinese presence and administration in that region just evaporated. So if India wants to play the 1914 British drawn card, China can play the 1300-year-old war card, and Gao Zhikai's retort is straight up payback. An eye for an eye, a line for a line. The historical records in the Ziji Tongjian and the Old Book of Tang both confirm in 647 AD. Tang Emperor Taizong sent his envoy Wang Xuans to central India, the Magadha kingdom ruled by King Harsha, who was friendly with the Tang dynasty. Diplomatic relations were smooth, trade was flowing, everything was good. But when Wang arrived, he found a bloody coup. A usurper named Arunazva had murdered Harsha, attacked the Tang mission, looted all the tribute goods, and captured over 30 of Wang's men. Wang and his deputy Zhang Shiren escaped. Didn't run back to China for reinforcements. They didn't have satellite phones or fighter jets back then. Instead, went straight to Tibet and Nepal, rallied 8,200 troops from local kings who respected Tang authority, marched back into India, and within 3 days reached the Middle Ganges. Crushed Arunazvarmi, captured him alive, hauled him back to Changan in chains, and erected a victory stela right there on the Ganges marking the border. History calls it the Wang Xuans Line. And get this, in 1990, a Tang dynasty stela was actually unearthed in Tibet with the inscription, "Defeated the enemy with troops," erected stela's boundary, confirming that this isn't mythology. It's documented physical archaeological history. So when Gao jokes about the Ganges border, he's not just making a clever retort, he's weaponizing 1,300 years of history against India's colonial hangover. It's brilliant, it's brutal, and it's absolutely lethal. So let's wrap this up. Every single time India's Victoryology collides with Gao Zhikai, it gets smashed into tiny little pieces. It's like a natural law of the universe. When Mr. Gao steps up to the mic, India's delusions go down in flames. They can spin their parallel universe all they want. They can chant their mantras of victory. They can send out their propaganda teams and hold their victory parades. But reality has a way of catching up, and Gao is the one delivering the receipt. This is the kind of hard-hitting, no bullshit analysis you don't get from mainstream media. They're too busy being polite, too busy trying not to offend anyone, but not here. We call it like we see it. India has a lot of potential, sure. They've got 1 billion people, a growing economy, a proud history, but potential isn't the same as achievement. And until they drop this Victoryology fantasy and start dealing with the real world, they're going to keep getting embarrassed on the global stage. Gao isn't mean, he's just accurate, and accuracy hurts when you've been living in a dream. All right, that's the real deal for today. I'll catch you all on the next one. Stay sharp, stay woke, and don't buy the fake narratives. Peace.